Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, September 26th, 2018. We are live. Not a rerun at the moment. Next year, this will be a rerun, I'm guessing. I think I'm going to be busy about this time next year. I've got plans. I know what I'm going to be doing. I don't know what I'm going to be doing. I don't know. Figured we'd explore that possibility today. Another Kavanaugh day, and tomorrow's the big Kavanaugh day. Not that it's going to change any Republican minds, but it's going to be finally, we're going to get the testimony of Kavanaugh and his accuser, Christine Blasey Ford. And it's going to be some kind of spectacle, I guess, tomorrow. The Republicans on the committee, I guess, don't trust themselves to do a decent enough job of questioning either of the two of them and have gone to hire outside counsel instead, which is permissible. And I'm not certain what format they're going to use for including those questions. It may be that I had that question posed to us this morning. It may be that they design it such that senators on the Republican side will have to yield their questioning time to the outside counsel to do her questioning, or they could structure things entirely differently. They have the muscle to do it, of course, controlling the gavel. They could give themselves questioning time, give Democrats questioning time, or I guess they could try and give the Democrats no questioning time, but I don't think they'll go that far, and also give the outside counsel time as well. They have done things like that in the past, although not usually with outside counsel. Anyway, a bit of mystery surrounding the hiring of the outside counsel. We now know who it is and where she's coming from. We were always clear that it was going to be a woman was going to be hired for this job, because of course they realize the Republican representation on the Judiciary Committee is all male, and all white male, and all old white male at that. And it wasn't a good look for the questioning that was going to be going on. So they wanted to, I guess, one, soften things a little bit, two, not tar their own hands with any rough questioning of her, and three, hire, apparently, somebody who is experienced in, this is interesting, in prosecuting sex crimes and sex offenses, which is interesting because, hey, I thought that Kavanaugh wasn't on trial here, or I guess he actually is. I don't know. It's very weird that this is happening, but that's what they've decided to do. An interesting person they're bringing to the fore in doing this, and also interesting developments on the Christine Blasey Ford front as well. Apparently, she something of an expert in the area too. I think we only knew about her that she was a sociology professor, but it turns out that you have to look a little further than that to find out what is her area of expertise. It doesn't look like they are going to be able to rattle her all that easily by bringing in an expert on sex crimes to question her, although I really don't know what they thought the optics of that was going to be. But as it happens, like I said, I did happen to catch a highly recommended diary at Daily Kos by Mystic54, who headlines the piece, Republicans are about to have their hats handed to them. The accuser, Christine Blasey Ford, is herself a sex crimes expert. Very little media attention, it is noted here, has been focused on her credentials and bona fides on the very topic she will be asked about, that being the acute and lasting psychological impact that abuse and things like sexual assault have on victims, especially young victims. She's written books about it. Not only that, she will explain at the hearing that the reason she chose her field of study comes directly out of the very assault she will tell us about on Thursday. So that's not likely to go particularly well for Republicans. Not a lot of this appears to be going well, but we'll see what tomorrow's performance brings. Word is that they are going to insist on a committee vote on Friday regardless. That will also mean regardless of whether or not they hear in any way, shape, or form from Debbie Ramirez in all of this, or anyone else for that matter. There's still time, of course, for others to come forward, and they are coming forward in numbers, not necessarily coming out personally and demanding time to speak, but affidavits being collected along the way. Op-eds being written, people offended, people who attended Yale alongside Brett Kavanaugh, offended by his attempt to portray himself as a choir boy of sorts in his Fox News interview, have been speaking out and saying, hey, that's not the Brett Kavanaugh I knew. And so it's going to become, there's a lot of he's and a lot of she's saying things in this so-called he said, she said story. So we'll have to wait another day to sort them out. But again, tops in the news, other than, I guess, Trump being laughed at the UN, tape of which we were able to play yesterday. And I understand Fox News may be airing a slightly edited version of that tape without some of the laughter or without any of it, or the laughter turned down. I think we got a particularly good tape of it yesterday. I've seen even a couple of the other news networks are circulating tapes that you just got to have the audio up high enough to hear that first wave of laughter. That second wave, though, is pretty obvious. And then some great pictures of him sitting dejectedly by the lectern after that. Good day for President Trump. It was fantastic. Anyway, Greg Dworkin is with us. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
I'm fine. I'm just catching
calendar
up with the non-Kavanaugh news, and since you were talking about the UN,
yes,
I don't want to let this one slip by. Steven Seagal is
UN
prepared to resolve Vladivostok's political crisis and step in as governor.
Oh, well.
I represent the interests of President Putin, he says.
Oh, that's a bold thing to say for an American.
That's pretty weird.
Yeah.
So they're best friends. And he wants to be governor of a Russian province. So, maybe it's funny because Trump didn't say anything about that, but that's because he didn't say anything at all about Russia. This UN thing. That's probably why they were laughing.
That may be it.
Well, I mean, they were laughing because he said the U.S. has done more in the last few years than like in the history of since the moon was created.
He said his administration had done more. Yeah, it's even worse. But yes, it would have been a dumb comment even if he had tried to distribute it around.
Well, he is the state,
Yeah, that's true. Well, he thinks so. Anyway, that was
you
great
can't
episode.
separate those things.
Yeah, I understand he's now saying that was a joke, and that's why
he meant to
laughed.
say he's doing the Pee Wee Herman thing, which, by the way, given the sexual stuff floating around both with him and with Kavanaugh, probably not a good analogy to do.
Just joking. Yeah. Oh, that's a good point.
Hey.
You're never far from
who
situation.
else had women come forward from like 35 years ago?
Who? No, I'm not aware.
The guy who went to jail,
Oh, okay.
Was Bill Cosby. That was yesterday.
That's right.
And that sentencing probably isn't great timing for Kavanaugh because it just reminds everybody that, yes, you can come forward after 35 some odd years. And, yes, it's really difficult to do about somebody who is in a very high-level power position. And it's just a reminder of all of that.
And that someone somewhere, some 12 people somewhere, found that evidence that was 35 years old or so was solid enough to convict beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason Cosby got in trouble is he decided he was going to turn around and sue them for defamation, which opened everything up for discovery, and then he was, in trouble.
Well, Brett Kavanaugh's a lawyer, so he's not going to make any mistakes.
Well, that's okay. Trump threatens to sue everybody all the time, right?
Oh, yeah, that's true.
This is why you don't. Well, I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on the internet, but, I do know some things. Yeah. And one of the things I know is it's really stupid to threaten to sue somebody when you yourself are the perp.
It's not a good idea. Projection is not a good plan.
No,
it's
just really
a bad look, and it gets you in trouble. And, well, I hope it gets the president in more trouble. I don't know. Brett Kavanaugh, though, he's a lawyer. He's not threatening to sue. That's one plus. Although I do understand he's not necessarily all that well versed in the law.
Well, so what do you want to talk about, Kavanaugh or political polling?
Is the polling about Kavanaugh?
Both, but which one do you want to do first?
Your
show. You get to choose.
Kavanaugh. I haven't gotten tired of him yet.
You got to look at the Randy Rainbow story. They're singing along with Kavanaugh. It's wonderful. He did it to the tune of Camelot, and it's absolutely hysterical.
I missed that.
All Randy Rainbow things are hysterical, but that one in particular, you must see. I'll find it for you. In the meantime. So here's the thing. What we learned this morning. We learned a number of things this morning. We learned that affidavits are there to corroborate Dr. Ford. She talked to 4 people by name various years before the nomination. I sent you the link to all of them, but I'll give you a quick read of just one of them to give you an idea. I remember the timing of the conversation because it was shortly after Stanford University student Brock Turner was sentenced for felony sexual assaults after raping an unconscious woman on Stanford's campus. There was a common public perception that the judge gave Mr. Turner too light a sentence.
Yeah.
Christine expressed anger at Mr. Turner's lenient sentence, stating that she was particularly bothered by it because she was assaulted in high school by a man who is now a federal judge in Washington, D.C.
Dope.
She did not mention the assault to me again until June 29, 2018, 2 days after Justice Anthony Kennedy announced his resignation from the Supreme Court of the United States. So she's got 4 affidavits. I think one of them is from her husband, but the point being that we testify in a deposition, I guess. I don't know these legal terms. That it looks legal because like each sentence has a number in front of it.
Okay.
So, right?
Yeah.
So they say, look, she told us about this, and this was the year, and this is how I know it was the year. Here's the restaurant that I went to. Here's the receipt for the restaurant. I only went there once, so I have the date, and she told me the name.
Calendars, or it didn't happen.
Yeah. So she's got the receipts.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. And another story, another example of more sexual assault in the news, reminding us of, hey, there's sexual assault all the time, and bad timing for Kavanaugh on that one.
Right. Because there were other people who were relatively well known. The other things that we learned today, we learned that Deborah Ramirez, who's the Yale person, accusations about Kavanaugh exposing himself to her. Lawyer was on TV this morning. From what I understand, she also wants an FBI background check, and she says her lawyer's been trying to get a hold of the committee to arrange to discuss things, and every time they call in, the committee's not there. So the committee's stalling them. The hearings are tomorrow.
Yeah, so that way if they come in tomorrow and they say, I don't know, we never heard from her, you never picked up the phone, they can 50% of the audience will believe that she didn't try to call them.
Right, so she's on TV saying, yeah, no, actually they did. And then we also learned multiple Yale classmates, say Kavanaugh was a sloppy drunk in contrast to the Fox interview where he tried to portray himself as a choir boy. And this is important because the whole point of the hearing tomorrow, even though they're slanted to protect Kavanaugh, is still who do you believe? So this Vox piece this morning, Republicans keep saying there's no evidence behind claims of Kavanaugh's misconduct. That's not true. Senate Republican leaders want Ford to be heard, just not believed.
Yes.
Right? So the Senate Republicans, the story says, want it both ways. They're already claiming the accusations aren't credible. But, with those affidavits, they're very credible. Yeah, and with the assertion on and the insistence on Kavanaugh's part that he never really drank, like that. He never drank in high school or college like that. He always was into sports and church and all these other things. But you've got people around him saying actually he was a sloppy drunk. Yeah. And his best friend was a blackout drunk. And the committee absolutely positively doesn't want that best friend blackout drunk who wrote about things in books to testify. So the American public is going to be looking at this and saying, well, who's more credible?
I guess so.
It's an amazing gamble on the part of the Republicans. It's really stunning that his nomination hasn't already been pulled.
It is. And I guess it's interesting, too, to just watch this. I know there's going to be a lot of skeptics out there, and you have good reason to be skeptical that even these additional hearings will change any Republican minds. But remember also that the Republican minds were dead set against having this hearing that they're having tomorrow. And they can...
And the vote was supposed to be last week, don't forget.
Yes, they can pound the gavel and say no to those hearings. They didn't have to have them, but they had to have them. That's the thing. They could have said no, but politically it was impossible, and so here we are.
Right.
And they could just vote on his nomination and push him through, but they haven't, and here we are.
Here we are. And why are we here? I'm going to get this in at some point, probably after the break, when we start talking about polls in a more systematic fashion. Okay. But a new LA Times USC poll this morning, the Democrats have a 14-point margin, 55-41, with likely voters in the generic ballot. 14 points.
Okay, likelies.
That's the background behind why there are hearings.
Yeah.
If that were not the case, there wouldn't be hearings. If the Republicans are up 14 points, no hearings, vote last week.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right.
What you have is two separate things, and you'd say, which is it? But actually, they're both true at the same time. One is kabuki, where the Republicans organize the hearings that they are forced to have in the way that is most favorable to Kavanaugh and least favorable to Dr. Ford, such as not telling her until the last minute who's going to be questioning her, such as having a hired woman who apparently has her own skills, but of course Mitch McConnell refers to as an assistant.
Yes.
Good optics there, Mitch, doing the questioning, not allowing Mark Judge to testify, Kavanaugh's best friend who's the blackout drunk, and from what I understand, limiting the questions. I think everybody gets like 5 minutes a question or something like that. So I don't know how much time Dr. Ford's really going to have to make her case, but that's design. That's the kabuki part. And then the vote on the committee vote is scheduled the next day, which is part of the kabuki because, first of all, the rules say you need 3 days notice. So it's a marker. And in doing this, Grassley say we don't have to vote on Friday. It's just that I have to tell you that if we choose to vote Friday, I got to tell you now so that we can.
True.
But if things don't go well in the hearing, we're not voting on Friday.
Yeah.
But so that's there. But that's part of the big orchestrated Mitch McConnell. The vote to put him on the Supreme Court is inevitable. They did that with health care, which went down. But that's what they do. They tried to get this momentum going, and so everybody understands out there. We have the votes. Bob Corker said, they told us to stick around over the weekend, so after the Friday vote, we can then go ahead and confirm him.
Yeah.
That's what they would like you to believe. First Read, of course, and everybody else is looking at this, then actually says, well, wait a minute, that's the kabuki part. But then there's the circus part. And the circus part is when you do high wire acts live. And although you have a pretty good idea of what's going on, you really, really, in the end, don't really know how it's going to turn out.
Yeah. Well,
so they don't have votes, in other words. They do not have the votes. And they don't know how it's going to turn out.
Yeah. If they did, they could have had them. They certainly would have looked strong.
Week. I mean, they don't have the votes.
They could have done it this week.
Bob Corker also says it's more than just Murkowski, who has said she wants an FBI investigation but won't make them do it. She's also said that you really have to listen to the woman, and there's not enough listening to her. And it's not just that, and of course Collins, and of course Flake, who's getting pressure from Mormon women back home to vote no on Kavanaugh. It's not just them, Corker says. There's a whole bunch of other people you don't know about who really have trepidations about this. Why? Because of that 14-point margin I mentioned in the poll.
Yeah, well, that's part of it. And internally, inside the Senate, you actually have senators saying, listen, now they may be saying, I will vote with you in lockstep in the end, but my price for voting with you lockstep is you must have these hearings. It doesn't matter how we look in them, I will vote with you. But if I don't have these hearings, I'm going to get killed. Right. And you got to do it.
Certainly that's Murkowski, and absolutely that's Collins' position.
Mm-hmm. And Flake, too,
Collins is a proceduralist in that sense. She said, I can't make a judgment based on the merits. If I did that, I'd be voting against my party. So therefore, I have to have it done in a procedural fashion that allows me to use that as the excuse.
Yes, and they can certainly they can have the hearings that all of us will view as slam dunk for Christine Blasey, And, of course, Republicans will just say, no, actually, slam dunk for Kavanaugh, and now I'm ready to vote yes because we went through this exercise.
Right. The problem is if she's really credible, that falls apart, and they know that.
Yeah, well, we'll see what they do about it.
Absolutely, positively their plan. The circus says you have the High Wire Act and everything goes fine.
Yeah.
But live means maybe not.
Yeah, well, we'll see. That's the last best chance for things to go wrong about this. But like we said, they don't need to have that. McConnell could have, if it wasn't for the fact that he must know that there are X number of Republican senators who said, if you bring this thing to the floor without this hearing, I'm voting no. And he had to believe that in order to have this hearing, because otherwise he just says, you don't need to have a committee hearing. They had them anyway, and you can say you had what you had. We're discharging the committee, and we're having the vote tomorrow, and if you don't like it, don't do it, but face the voters, and the time is now. But he did not do that. Just I want to emphasize
again, a reminder,
both
Robert Bork and Clarence Thomas did not get a majority in committee.
Right, and that's another thing. You don't have to win the committee vote. You can lose the committee vote and still get to the floor.
Right. Now, that's, again, where some of the politics, and it's really interesting how that breaks out. And, people say different things about this. But McConnell has said, win or lose in committee, I'm taking this to the floor.
Yeah.
He's committed.
Right.
So that's going to happen.
Which also likely means that there are senators who say, so long as you have this hearing, I don't care what happens at it now. Anyway, I won't vote no for sure if you at least have the hearing. After that, we'll see how it goes.
But it's also an admission that he doesn't have the votes. You never say that if you're going to have a majority in the committee.
Yeah, and so all I'm saying is it may turn out exactly as everyone expects in the end, that Republicans simply vote in lockstep. But I get persistent questions about why do you think it could be anything else? And the answer is because right now it's something else.
Yeah, right now they don't have the votes. And if Blasey Ford looks really credible and, there's a public outcry about this because she's got the affidavits. She's got, and Deborah Ramirez has got the request for the FBI, and Kavanaugh does not. The other side of the coin is that Kavanaugh went on Fox News, even Trump said it was a weak performance, and says that, he's a choir boy, and there's lots of evidence that he, at that point in his life, was a pretty heavy drinker. Yeah. So he's lying. So what happens if he gets quizzed about being lying during the hearing? How does that make him look? Yeah. What does the public think? The lawyers for the ladies are on TV. What does the public think? So all of that feeds in to the senator's calculations, and that's why everybody's saying too many moving pieces. The thing that political strategists hate, and politicians are political strategists by definition, they don't like knowing. They don't like the fact that they may not know exactly what's going to happen. So in a fluid situation, they're going to say, we'll just have to wait and see till Thursday. They like it if they could script everything out and then they can stick to the script. That's what Cornyn and the leadership is doing. But the rank and file really don't know how this is going to play. So everything is really up in the air. And yes, he can lose. So now, given that that's the case, now you have the pundits, the big mouths, like me, who are out there saying, okay, well, let me game out what that means. Each side wants the other one to win. You see, because if Kavanaugh is put on the court, that helps the Democrats in the election. Well, the Democrats are already doing quite well in the election. Thank you very much. But if the Republicans lose and Kavanaugh gets pulled, then what? Everybody thinks Amy Coney Barrett just gets shoved through before the election. But how does that help the Republicans? Rush Limbaugh says that if Kavanaugh loses, then none of the Republicans turn out because what good are you? You haven't come through on any of your important problems. We put up with all the rest for this, and you didn't give us this. And then other Republican strategists say, that's crazy. Everybody's rallying around Kavanaugh, even though we don't like him, the way we rally around Trump. And if he doesn't get on the court, there's going to be a red wave like you never saw because everybody's going to be really angry about it, which is really dumb because the only people who really care are activists, and activists already vote. So where are you going to get those new votes that's going to change that 14-point margin?
That is a good question.
From independents who barely vote, who don't really think about voting, who don't really care about whether or not they're going to vote in a midterm election with the president not on the ballot? That's dumb, but that's what they're saying. So you look at it and say, you scratch your head and say, I don't think you really have the full picture here. It's not really clear to Republicans how upset Democrats still are about Merrick Garland. They don't get it.
True.
They don't get how angry women are about how Dr. Ford is being treated now and how Trump has been treating them for the past 2 years. And they just don't understand. But, the only way to make them understand is Election Day. And that's actually fairly close, less than 50 days.
Yeah, well, it's on everyone's mind, no doubt about that. Okay. Whew. Well,
so that takes us to the break.
Yeah, pretty much. We're not quite, but we've got another minute here before we even start with the music. So,
okay.
Let's see, what else?
Let me tell you about Jeet here then. Jeet here says, there's something that's been annoying about me. Leaving aside the sexual assault allegations, Kavanaugh's just a massive, shameless liar, as seen by his Fox interview.
Yes.
The fact that he was a heavy drinker as a teen and college student is supported by tons of evidence, yearbook, memoirs, Romanov clefs of Mark Judge, testimony from many who knew him, including Yale roommates. It's certain as anything of this sort can be, and by the way, that's what the FBI background check that he's avoiding would tell us. Also, the persona in the yearbook, and based on the testimony of friends, is a frat boy, hard drinker, out to impress the guys, sometimes disrespectful of women. But in the Fox interview, he presented himself as a choir boy.
Yeah. It didn't work.
That just doesn't work. The smart play for Kavanaugh would be to not pretend to be teen squeaky clean. To me, he's like Eddie Haskell from the old Leave It to Beaver show.
Yeah, okay.
Right? He's the obvious liar who's up there. And that's just not a good play because everybody knows who Eddie Haskell is.
Yeah, well, that's not true. But everybody recognizes the type, that's for certain. Yeah. We have modern versions of that. Yeah, and people have been talking about, I guess, up until this point, for some reason, he's been pretending that all the drinking was okay because the drinking age was lower in Maryland when he was growing up, except he was under 18 during all of that time. And as it turns out, if you dig up the newspaper archives, no. That wasn't actually true.
He was lying about the little things. He lies about the big things.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Still talking about Kavanaugh, and as we went into the break, just a reminder, lots of people talking about the fact that he has been, to this point, excusing is what he says was perhaps occasional and moderate alcohol intake was A-okay because, of course, the drinking age in Maryland, back in the olden days, the drinking age in Maryland was 18. But people are producing the contemporaneous, here's that word again, newspaper accounts. No, not so. He was still 17 or younger by the time Maryland changed their drinking age from 18 to 21. People who are of age or nearly of age, certainly if you were about to come of age at that point, would remember it very well and remember all the political dynamics around it too. States changing their laws one after the other, under the threat of the federal government withholding highway funds if you did not comply. And then a couple other people pointing out, well, D.C. didn't raise its drinking age until a year later, at which point, of course, Kavanaugh would only have just turned 18, and they changed it ahead of him. In a place where there was so much drinking going on, everyone, of course, would have been acutely aware of being 17 and watching their state change the drinking age from 18 to 21. Not that he had ever reached the age of majority anyway, so I'm not really sure why that should have mattered. But as we were pointing out,
everybody was aware. That's the thing. Mark Murray, very neutral guy from NBC News, first read. Mark Murray tweets, "What does it say about Kavanaugh and the allegations against him that so many classmates are contradicting how he's portrayed himself from his high school and college days.
That is odd. You would not think that would be the case.
But the answer is easy. He's a liar.
Yeah. Oh, that's what it says. And
the
luckily,
point I'm making is that this is the impression of him that is circulating today, the day before the hearing.
Yeah, that's not so good, is it?
And that's after he had his Fox interview.
Well,
you
can have another one.
Thing.
What?
When they first talked to Dr. Ford, you may recall, she through her lawyer said, "There's some things I would like. I want to talk directly to the senators. Mm-hmm. I want him to go first, and then I'll talk, and then he can rebut." And immediately, Chuck Grassley, with the gavel, said, "That's not happening. You don't get to dictate any of this stuff. You're the witness. We tell you what to do, and you're going first."
Yeah.
And people looked at that and said, well, okay, fine. Why shouldn't Grassley have the right to decide that? She's the accuser. Why doesn't she go first? It turns out, in the Clarence Thomas hearings, Thomas went first. Mm-hmm. So there is a precedent. Okay. But the point I'm making is that they went through all of this maneuvering to make sure she goes first, and what happens? Kavanaugh goes on Fox News. He goes first.
Yeah, right. Well, they need
to
structure it that way.
Because now everybody thinks he's a liar.
Oh, well, he didn't do a good job with it. That's not my fault.
He did not, and that's why Trump is really upset with him. Yeah. And that's why Trump is sticking his 2 feet and his big mouth into it, because Trump is saying, no. I know how to handle these kind of accusations. This is what you do. Mm. Ramirez was so drunk, she can't even remember it. Forget about her. Don't even talk to her.
Right. That's what he's done, and he's gone ahead and done it. I thought that was really interesting.
Well, let me read you Gabriel de Benedetti's tweet from yesterday. I'm sensing a theme in this week's Senate polls. I'm trying to make a subtle point here. Let's see if you can pick up what it is. Florida, Nelson, Democrat, plus 17 over Scott among women. Oh. Arizona, Sinema, plus 15 over McSally among women. Michigan, Stabenow, plus 24 over James among women. Wisconsin, Baldwin, plus 27 over Vukmir among women. Get the point here?
There were numbers in all of them.
Yeah. And there are people running. Apparently there's an election
coming. Right. Oh, yeah. That thing. Right. From 35 years ago or something like that.
So the whole way that they've set up tomorrow is a potential disaster for them. And I just don't understand why they don't see that.
They are political geniuses, and we must just not be understanding this correctly. I don't know what makes them think that it's I don't know, but we live in different worlds, and there's certainly a world in which there will be C-SPAN callers tomorrow that say it's open and shut case for Kavanaugh.
Well, that's fine, but you can hire them as much as you want. That doesn't really change how people actually vote.
It helps the economy.
Alan Abramowitz was looking at the live polling that New York Times Siena is doing this cycle. Mm-hmm. In 22 House districts polled by New York Times Siena, all currently held by Republicans. I'll read some of them to you. Democrats, on the average, have a 0.5 point lead. In effect, they're tied.
Yeah.
In Republican districts with Republican incumbents, they're tied. That may be more significant than individual district results, Abramowitz says, and he's right. These should be solid leads for these Republican incumbents. They're not. So, to give you an idea, this is the polling in real time. So right now, it's funny. They're doing New Jersey, and they're doing New Jersey 3, and this is MacArthur, who was one of the architects of the repeal the Affordable Care Act that went down on the House side. 50% Kim, 39% MacArthur. That is, the Democrat is leading the incumbent Republican 50-39 with 11% undecided. Probably an outlier. It's probably not that much, but gives you an idea what's going on there.
Yeah.
Okay. Dino Rossi, Washington 8. Dino is a Republican incumbent. He leads 46-44 over his Democratic challenger, 10% undecided. Not a good number for an incumbent. California 45. The Democrat Porter 48. Walters, the Republican, 43. California 49. Democrat Levin 51. Harkey, the Republican, 41. I mean, these are Pete Sessions, 48-47 over his Democratic challenger, 5% undecided, in Texas 32. Mm-hmm. I mean, these are all close races. The people who are expected to win because they've successfully distance themselves from the Trump brand and have their own personal brand. Florida 26, Corbello 47, Marcusel Powell 44, 9% undecided. That's supposed to be a race that Corbello runs away with. He's not. Colorado 6, Mike Kaufman, Republican incumbent. 51% for the Democrat, 40% for the Republican. These are just terrible polls for the House side of things. And on the Senate, there's a lot of terrible polls for Republicans as well. We have a tie race in Ohio for governor. We have Quinnipiac polling and Marist polling out on Florida. The Marist polling is probably more reasonable. Senate, Nelson 48, Scott 45, Governor Gillum 48, DeSantis 43. That Quinnipiac poll is an even bigger lead for Nelson, so he seems to have stabilized. Rick Scott spent a whole bunch of money early, pulled it close, but it looks like Nelson isn't in a commanding lead, but it looks like, he might be able to pull this out, probably Gillum pulling him across the finish line because Nelson's not a very good candidate, that is to say, as a campaigner. He's not a very good campaigner. Mm-hmm. And Trump job performance in Florida, approved 46, disapproved 48. I mean, there's a lot of background stuff out here about how the Republicans are doing poorly. Virginia 7, that's one that's dear to my heart. Dave Bratt, 42. He's the one that upset Eric Cantor. Mm-hmm. Spanberger, the Democrat, 47.
Okay.
This is the one where the ex-CIA agent, Spanberger, was accused of being a traitor and trying to help ISIS and terrorists.
Oh, okay. Didn't work?
Right? Didn't work so well. Okay.
How odd.
Dave Wasserman points out this incredible ad in Virginia 2.
Yeah.
A fellow named Scott Taylor, incumbent, who's kind of a jerk.
I see.
He's got one of these, I remember this so clearly from when Chris Murphy won his first House race. The Republicans always do the ominous stuff, the bear in the woods that Reagan did.
Right, yeah. Okay.
So he's got one of those Jaws thing where he's claiming that his opponent, who happens to be leading him in the polls, is a stealth candidate, and he's got the Jaws music and the shark under the water, and it's just a terrible ad. It reminds you of the Demon Sheep stuff. So I dropped that in the list if you want to take a look at that later.
What does
but, the entire political background is that the blue wave is coming together.
Well, it's all, I mean, it's all been a numbers game. I guess, again, with the skepticism that lingers, and I can't help but take note of it. At least I want to at least do that. And I have that feeling, that nagging feeling. We always do. That's why we're Democrats. We have that nagging feeling in the back of our heads that it's still a LOL, YOLO, nothing matters world. But again, that's a guess at the best.
Ask the women.
Yeah, that's where the only thing approaching evidence or proof that we have that it could be different is, well, scientifically, we try and do it as scientifically as possible, and pollsters are better / worse at it depending on how they approach things. But if you're asking people, hey, what are you going to do? And asking thousands of them, what are you going to do? And doing it with a scientific methodology, and they're telling you we're going to crush Republicans, you gotta at least take note of that. Mm-hmm. It may not come together, and then again, it may not come together in exactly the right way, and doesn't mean that they all win, and you can't point to Republicans who hold on and say, see, there was no blue wave. None for you, maybe, except you won by 1 point where you used to win by 15. You are the victim of a blue wave, though you haven't lost. That is possible, too. As you have told us many times.
I'm going to leave you with all of this. That's about my summary for today. But again, I just wanted to point out one of the fascinating things about this whole Kavanaugh nomination process that's played out in public is that it's like, watching one of these playoff baseball series here. With 7 games, and one day one side wins and the other day the other side wins, and it feels like this one has the next day it's that one, and it just keeps swaying back and forth depending upon what media is focusing on. Mm-hmm. But overall, the reports are that I don't know who to believe, and I want to hear an investigation, but for the most part, the women tend to believe Dr. Ford, and that's been the background. And now that you have Kavanaugh making it worse for himself It just really feels like the public opinion momentum, which had already been against the judge. Remember, he's underwater in polling. Is just going even more against him. Public opinion is going against him. And he's already just about the most unpopular Supreme Court pick we have, as far as we know, from polling. So that audience, the public opinion audience, which is quite different than the Senate audience, Kavanaugh's losing. Now, as far as what happens in the Senate, again, nobody knows. But I'll just say that he hasn't won.
Not yet. And they keep pushing it back. And we'll see whether they go ahead with things on Friday or not. And it was a good process.
You know, he may well wind up being confirmed. But it sure don't feel inevitable.
That is true. That's changing. And your baseball analogy makes some sense, right? I mean, you can still win the World Series. And you can win it in a 4-game sweep, or you can go to Game 7.
Yeah, this one's going to Game 7.
Yeah,
this is
you
not
win. But yeah, you can't say it. Well, you weren't a runaway, overwhelming favorite if you got taken to the 7th game.
Right. Anyway, with that, I'll leave you. This is Greg Dworkin speaking with my good friend David Waldman, Kagro in the Morning. Tomorrow when we do the show, the first part of it will be just prior to the actual hearing, I think, which is at 10. And then the second part of your show, the hearing will be going on. So I don't know how you're going to figure out that.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll figure something out. Throw something together.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, take care, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Very good. Okay, thanks, Greg. We'll see you then, and it'll be a big day tomorrow. Yes, the other thing I never got around to mentioning while we were on the air was, though we talked about it during the break, Kavanaugh and his denials of his drinking, which has riled everybody up. And then, of course, the excuse of the drinking that he didn't do being that the drinking age was 18, even though he was only 17, and how weird it is that he wouldn't remember this sort of thing. You'd think it would be on his calendar when they had changed the drinking age, but apparently not. And by the way, the calendar is out now and in circulation. And he is a meticulous note keeper, if those are in fact all contemporaneous notes. I'd like an FBI forensic investigation to carbon date that thing and check the ink on it and make sure that nothing was filled in after the fact. But hey, we'll probably never get to that level. But more important, again, as was pointed out, the drinking age hadn't changed. Had changed. He pretended he didn't know that. The upshot of which is that he is both lying about his drinking, as he's poised to be on the Supreme Court, lying about his drinking and ignorant of the state of the law. How would somebody like me, supposedly a legal scholar, a D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals judge, looking to get myself a seat on the Supreme Court, there's really no way to find out, if you think about it, what the law was and when it changed. It's just impossible to figure that stuff out. So I might as well just say what I think it is, which is that the drinking age was 18, and although I wasn't 18, it's okay because I was really, really close, and that doesn't matter. And P.S., I want to uphold the rule of law, and I'm a textualist and an originalist, and yada, 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 all that stuff. So not only lying about the drinking, but lying about the lying or ignorant about the actual state of the law, a knowable thing, a researchable thing, something you might even be able to have a clerk look up for you if you're too busy. But no dice. Oh, speaking of no dice, here's an interesting tweet that just went by a moment ago. Let's see. Kavanaugh's claim that he has no memory loss while drinking is particularly odd, since his apology for growing aggressive after a game of dice, which he does not remember, is part of the record. And the screen grab here from the secret and since released, or at least leaked, super secret committee confidential emails. Among them, I think you probably remember this one. Let's see. Great work, so-and-so, whose name is redacted here. And thanks for hooking everything up for your week crew. Check will be in the mail once I get your new address. Excellent time. Apologies to all for missing Friday. Good excuse. Arriving late Saturday. Weak excuse. And growing aggressive after blowing still another game of dice. Don't recall. Interesting. So, growing aggressive and not recalling what happened after the game of dice, which it doesn't say that there was drinking going on here. That's true. But I think that's the assumption behind all of it. And that is, that would have been from his time in the White House. Yeah. So as a, like, actual full grown adult male, still engaging in these things and matching the description of what contemporaries at Yale say he was really like when he was drinking, that he was a nice enough guy when he wasn't drinking, but that when he drank, particularly to great excess, he grew aggressive and then would likely have suffered memory loss afterwards. I don't know how much, I don't think anybody is willing to say, I know that he was a blackout drunk. We know that Mark Judge says he, Judge, this is about himself, was. And I don't think he makes the claim that Bart O'Kavanaugh was. But I guess this was clearly a part of the way they grew up. And so here he is describing a social situation in which they played a game of dice, probably did some drinking, followed by him growing aggressive and losing another game of dice that he doesn't recall. How odd. Okay. Well, not the strongest evidence in the world, but an interesting entry in the ledger, as it were. Okay. Let's see. So I said, speaking of the entries in the ledger, those calendars are out, and they are, odd, to say the least. And I don't know. So some of them are in circulation. He does keep some meticulous notes. Matt Iglesias has tweeted one of them around one of the pages. What does this say? Go to Timmy's for, it says skis with Mark Judge and others. I don't know. It's very weird, the things that he noted. And like I say, he was a little more meticulous than I thought anybody would be likely to put down. There we are. Oh, I see. Ski. Oh, it's SKI apostrophe S. Oh, interesting. So now we got to interpret the slang here. It is July 1st. He's we want to put the most innocent spin you can on this, right? Go to Timmy's house for skis with Judge Tom. You remember we talked about his friend Tom yesterday. PJ, he's been in the news too. Bernie and Squee, SQUI. Go to Timmy's for skis. So very innocently, they were going to wax their skis in preparation for the ski season on July 1st, 1982. Unless, of course, they were going for brew skis. Oh dear. Could that possibly be it? Although that would pose a problem for people who were laughing about the idea of his bringing out his 1982 calendars and saying, oh, yeah, of course that exonerates him because he didn't pencil in attempted rape. Who would be putting down parties that they were going to drink underage at on their calendar? And I guess he's done it, to his credit, I suppose. In July 1982, he wanted everybody to know that he was going to Timmy's, or at least he wanted to remind himself, don't forget to go to Timmy's for skis, which wouldn't have an apostrophe in it, but whatever, we'll let you into Yale anyway because reasons. And what a great thing. Let's see. He's got an awful lot of rather trivial things on his calendar. So he was a meticulous record keeper at that. And I mean keeper, because he kept these. This is pretty amazing. Again, not really particularly helpful in terms of exonerating him and possibly even incriminating him, considering that he would have been underage. Putting on your calendar, got to go do some underage drinking. And then whatever happens. That I won't put down there. But, interesting, to say the very least. And there really is not much more we can say about it. All right, let's see. Coming up on the 10 o'clock hour, and we'll be expecting to hear from Joan McCarter at some point. No rush again, Joan, and I'm sure you're very busy in preparation for tomorrow's big day. We can take a look at some of the other items that we've set aside for discussion. And maybe here at this point, we can go to what's in pocket. There's a real interesting piece here. Well, two very interesting things that we ought to bring to light. I don't think we're going to get to both, but since we're on the Kavanaugh subject, we might as well get that out there. Slate magazine, which I don't think has ever been printed, had a piece with an interesting look at the Kavanaugh background. Brett Kavanaugh and the cruelty of male bonding. A very interesting and slightly different look at what it was certainly what he was accused of doing and what it might have meant. Lily Loughborough, I'm taking a wild guess at how that last name is pronounced. And I'm sorry if I don't get it right, because this is a really interesting take. If you haven't seen it, well, I'll read it to you, and you can take a look at it later. Brett Kavanaugh and the cruelty of male bonding, when being one of the guys comes at a woman's expense. This is a slightly different twist. For what it's worth, and absent evidence or allegations to the contrary, I believe Brett Kavanaugh's claim that he was a virgin through his teens. I know everybody sort of rolled their eyes at that one, but that's the one that's the least troubling to believe, although it seems like, I mean, he offered it up. I guess I'll comment. He clearly offered it up in an attempt to portray himself, well, a teenager who remained a virgin for all those years was surely an innocent kid and wouldn't be involved in all this sexual activity, wanted or unwanted. So you have to give me a pass here somehow. You have to believe me. I would never do such a thing. Would a virgin do such a thing? Well, this is the interesting theory that, yes, he very well may. So to continue with the article, I believe Brett Kavanaugh's claim that he was a virgin through his teens. I believe it in part because it squares with some of the oddities I've had a hard time understanding about his alleged behavior. Namely, that both allegations are strikingly different from other high-profile stories the past year, most of which feature a man and a woman alone. And yet both the Kavanaugh accusations share certain features. There is no penetrative sex. Good morning, everybody. There were always male onlookers. And most importantly, there's laughter. True. In each case, the other men, not the woman, seem to be Kavanaugh's true intended audience. In each story, the cruel and bizarre act the woman describes, restraining Christine Blasey Ford and attempting to remove her clothes in the allegation. And in Deborah Ramirez's, we know what happened there. And again, I should probably be sparing you the details where they're not necessary at this point. Seems to have been done in the clumsy and even manic pursuit of male approval. Yeah, that's true. Even Kavanaugh's now notorious yearbook pages with its references to 100 kegs or bust and the like seems less like an honest reflection of a fun guy than a representation of a try-hard, willing to say or do anything as long as his bros think he's cool. In other words, the awful things Kavanaugh allegedly did only imperfectly, the awful things Kavanaugh allegedly did only imperfectly correlate to the familiar frame of sexual desire run amok. They appear to more easily fit into a different category, a toxic, this is a new word for me, homosociality that involves males wooing other males over the comedy of being cruel to women. How interesting. What an interesting theory. And that begins to make a certain amount of sense here. In both these accounts, Kavanaugh is laughing as he does something to a woman that disturbs or traumatizes her. Ford wrote in her letter to Senator Dianne Feinstein, Kavanaugh was, well, you know what? Again, here we're reading the details of the letter. And I guess here at this point, better late than never, I will warn off those of you who might find yourselves disturbed by such descriptions. Consider it my best attempt at a trigger warning, though late. We'll excuse you for a few minutes and see you back here in 5 if necessary. But I guess some of this is going to be probably required in order to give context to this argument. So again, Ford writes in her letter, there's some explicit detail in this, right? Kavanaugh was on top of me while laughing with Mark Judge, who periodically jumped onto Kavanaugh. They both laughed as Kavanaugh tried to disrobe me in their highly inebriated state. With Kavanaugh's hand over my mouth, I feared he may inadvertently kill me. Brett was laughing. Ramirez says in her account to the New Yorker, I can still see his face and his hips coming forward, like when you pull up your pants. She recalled another male student shouting about the incident. Somebody shouted down the hall, and I never thought I'd be shouting this myself, Brett Kavanaugh just put his penis in Debbie's face, she said. It almost seems unlikely. Why would you be using his entire name in that? That seems weird, but again, in the New Yorker piece, she makes a point of saying, I remember it because I remember how weird it was that they used his full name in shouting this down the hall. And, of course, how weird it is to say that. If these allegations are true, one of the more shocking things about them is the extent to which the woman being mistreated exists in a room where the men are performing for each other, using the woman to firm up their own bond. The Kavanaugh yearbook is littered with dumb codes that seem to speak to exactly this tendency. Stuff like boofing and devil's triangle all suggest that what mattered to Kavanaugh was displaying club membership. The question is, at whose expense? It goes without saying, I hope, that virgins are perfectly capable of doing everything Kavanaugh has so far been accused of. Offering a detail that personal was not only meant to be exculpatory in a specific sense, it was also deployed to counter an emerging image of Kavanaugh as sleazy frat guy, like his close friend and classmate Mark Judge. But he overshot the mark, and if you're going by his reactions in the Fox News interview, Kavanaugh's wounded astonishment at the very existence of bad behavior would mean he couldn't have known his good friend Mark Judge, who has written plenty about his own, very well at all. Kavanaugh's strategy, in other words, was to present himself as all innocence, not just a virgin, but a virgin who's never even heard of, let alone done, some of the things he's accused of. Everyone says so. The women I knew in college and the men I knew in college said that it's inconceivable I could have done such a thing, he said to Fox's Martha McCallum of Ramirez's allegation. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. When we left with the music of the break, probably just right on my tail here, I was just finishing up the quote, the illustrative quote, everyone says so. The quote, the women I knew in college and the men I knew in college said it's inconceivable that I could have done such a thing. You remember that quote? Well, this we follow up with is an unwise thing to claim. First, because what people say you're capable of isn't actually proof of what you did or didn't do. And second, because it happens to be untrue. One of Kavanaugh's freshman year roommates, James Roche, who we're talking about him the past couple of days, expressed precisely the opposite view, saying he found Ramirez's story credible and recalling that Kavanaugh, quote, was a notably heavy drinker, even by the standards of the time, and that he became excessive and belligerent, remember that, when he was very drunk. Another unnamed former classmate in the New Yorker story also used the word belligerent to describe Kavanaugh when inebriated. One thing we've learned about Kavanaugh, then, is that he perpetually overshoots. To put it bluntly, he lies. Rather than admit he was flawed or made some mistakes he regrets, or simply acknowledge that different people might have seen him differently, as they demonstrably did, he's doubling down on an unsustainable and untrue account of himself and his reputation. Under immense pressure and a bright spotlight, he claims that the women I knew in college and the men I knew in college, a large group, will all vouch for him. This is injudicious, but it adds to an emerging profile of a man who will go to long lengths to get approval. It's what Kavanaugh did when he accepted the nomination from Trump with a sycophantic speech that has, in the months since, made it become a telling document of his exaggerated need to affirm the club he belongs to. He claimed he'd, quote, witnessed firsthand Trump's appreciation for the vital role of the American judiciary. No one believes that. Adding, in a burst of mendacious hyperbole, that no president has ever consulted more widely or talked with more people from more backgrounds to seek input about a Supreme Court nomination. And by the way, how damning is that now that they won't listen to anybody who has anything to say about the guy? No president has ever consulted more widely or talked with more people from more backgrounds to seek input about a Supreme Court nomination. Well, there's now another 10 people who want to give some input about a Supreme Court nomination. They are more people. They are more diverse and from more backgrounds. But the president and his Republican minions in Congress suddenly have no interest in it whatsoever, though no president has ever been more open to such a thing. Amazing. And of course, it's a stupid construction and exactly the sort of thing that got Trump laughed at the UN yesterday. But to continue with the article, and after finding that out, Kavanaugh had said that, and it's what he did in that Fox interview as well. Present himself as a friendly virgin who worked on school and service projects and little else. A man who runs on external approval runs into problems quickly. Kavanaugh's strategies in the Fox interview was to portray himself as a public-spirited choir boy while sitting next to his kind-looking wife, who, by the way, is every bit a Republican operative, every bit the Republican operative that he is. That's how they met. But okay, we'll move on with the article. He repeatedly and proudly referred to the high school friends who, quote, produced overnight 65 women who knew me in high school, unquote. He staked a lot on that letter, whose signatories attested that, quote, he has behaved honorably and treated women with respect. Unfortunately for him, one of those much-invoked character witnesses, a woman named Renata, we'll say it that way today, Schroeder Dolphin, who offered her name in support of his, recently discovered how he, in turn, had used hers. The New York Times reported that Kavanaugh and a number of other graduates, including 8 members of the football team, referred to themselves in the yearbook as Renata, although they said Renate, alumni. The implication is obvious, and a poem from another guy's page lays it out clearly. You remember this one. You need a date, and it's getting late, so don't hesitate to call Renata. Okay, sorry. When Kavanaugh included himself in this group in the yearbook page, I think we can all agree that he was neither A, behaving honorably, as the letter attested, nor B, treating women with dignity and respect, as he repeatedly insisted in his Fox interview. This was not being a good friend. Much of what Kavanaugh said in that interview was disproved in the same day. This tells us something about how the man responds to incentives. Today, he needs to have been a good friend to women to be approved to the Supreme Court. Back then, he needed approval from his buddies, and we should note here, it doesn't say it in the article, but I'm going to add this. He needed approval from his buddies in order to get himself on the prep school to Yale Law School, to clerkship, to judgeship track. That's why he needed these guys. He needed the approval from his buddies, so he helped drag a girl's name through the mud to get it. Today, he needs to have been a virgin. Back then, he needed to have slept with Renata. He'll tell the truth as it needs to be, not as it is. Important point. Many have wondered, purely as a matter of strategy, why Kavanaugh has issued such forceful denials. Most good lawyers would advise against locking oneself in quite so firmly, but one thing that might make a guy overconfident in his ability to bluff his way out is faith in the support of his in-group. It's omerta. If you deny wrongdoing as a united front, you'll get away with it. That's where even this dumb yearbook entry thing becomes instructive. Kavanaugh was caught being cruel to a girl, and instead of owning up, he doubled down. It shows how boys who are cruel together lie together. This is why their denials are more emphatic than they need to be. Each relies on the strength and intensity of the others. Quote, Judge Kavanaugh and Mrs. Dolphin attended one high school event together and shared a brief kiss goodnight following that event, read a statement from Kavanaugh's lawyer. She denies the kiss. I'll take her word over his. They had no such other encounter. The language from Judge Kavanaugh's high school yearbook refers to the fact that he and Ms. Dolphin attended that one high school event together and nothing else. Yeah, right. 4 of the other players depicted in the Renata alumni photo issued a statement claiming that the phrase was, quote, intended to allude to innocent dates or dance partners, and were generally known within the community of people involved for over 35 years. Before laughing at the absurdity of this, it's worth reiterating that Renata did not know. One might then reasonably ask who the phrase, the community of people involved, includes. How does the yearbook help us understand the other allegations against Kavanaugh? Well, for one thing, Kavanaugh's admitted virginity shows how empty these rumors about Renata was. Whatever stories they circulated about her sexual behavior weren't actually about her. To them, she was less a person than a token you claim to gain status with your bros. That tells us something valuable about how Kavanaugh was willing to treat women when other guys were around. It also offers a clear window into how male networks like Kavanaugh's work. If you get caught, you deny. And if you can't, you manufacture explanations that may sound ridiculous to an outside audience, but you never break. His yearbook buddies tried to shelter him because sheltering him sheltered them. I like it. It's pretty sensible. This is making sense as a thesis to me. And by the way, it occurs to me this may be how the letter or the feelings that generated the letter may have come together. It may very well be the case, and Kavanaugh may be aware of it, that he behaves very differently one-on-one with women and with women in a group, in a social group where his buddies are around. And that's not at all uncommon. It's shameful and horrific that people still need to rely on that sort of dynamic, but it does happen. And it could very well be that one-on-one, he is respectful and honorable, etc., because he's shy and not at all outgoing and doesn't have the pressure of performing for the boys. I mean, that happens in a lot of ways and in a lot of different degrees. His happens to be rather extreme, but it's not at all uncommon. I find that totally believable. Let's continue then with the article. The fatal flaw in the Republicans' accusations of conspiracy is that if you wanted to falsely accuse someone of sexual misconduct, you'd likely choose something damning and unambiguous. You probably wouldn't include, as both allegations against Kavanaugh do, witnesses in the room who were his friends. You wouldn't, in Ramirez's case, admit to have been in drinking. You'd have no memory gaps, express no doubts or confusion, and you'd probably claim to have been raped. Instead, the stories that have arisen so far can only really be corroborated by the perpetrator's pals. These male witnesses universally remember nothing. Now, it's possible that they don't remember it because it never happened. Maybe they were too drunk to recall. Or maybe they're tapping into a long tradition of male in-group protection, partly to avoid being implicated themselves. Mark Judge remembers nothing so much that he's gone into hiding. His first and only comment to the journalist who tracks him down was, "How did you find me?" Which is an interesting one, too. I'm going to pause just for a second in the conclusion of this article. We're almost at the end here, in case you were wondering. But, yeah, he's hiding out. And that is interesting. First of all, his only comment to the reporter is, "How did you find me?" In other words, I've been caught. My worry is about having been caught, not about what I may have to say about the situation. The second thing is, I was struck by this one. How did you find me? Well, you know where they found him? They have found him holed up in a friend's beach house in Delaware. Only the thing is that all of their yearbook references and codes to one another are all about Beach Week and how much they love going to the beach in Delaware. Rehoboth, Bethany, they all get mentioned in there. And they find him where? In Bethany Beach. He went right where the yearbook said he loves to go more than any place else. How did you find me? You told me where you were hiding 35 years ago. Wow. So, I mean, that's pretty amazing, too. Okay, but to continue with the conclusion of this, how did you find me is his only comment, right? The other men Ramirez says were in the room at Yale also have, quote, zero recollection. It could be there's just nothing to remember, but there are other possibilities, like a mutually exonerating code of male secrecy. Brett Kavanaugh is on the record instructing his buds to keep omerta after a 2001 boat trip to Annapolis, Maryland, even from their wives. 2001. Remember, it's part of the same stash of emails that we were just reading about the dice game. Quote, reminders to everyone. In fact, it might even be the very same email that we were reading before. Yes, as a matter of fact, the one paragraph of the email about the dice game that I didn't read now appears right here. Reminders to everyone to be very, very vigilant with respect to confidentiality on all issues and all fronts, including with spouses. He wrote after apologizing for a variety of things, including growing aggressive after blowing still another game of dice. By this time, he wasn't in high school. He was in the White House. A good reminder. And a very interesting theory and a great piece overall. So congratulations to you. Lily, oh my goodness, I forgot that I couldn't remember how you say your last name. Loofborough. It's Loofborow. We'll call it Loofborough. And apologize for any incorrect pronunciation of that. All right, well, that really was very interesting. And a great theory overall, and I think it went a long way towards explaining what was going on. Okay, so let's say maybe, as often happens, Joan was just waiting for the conclusion of that article because it was a damn interesting one. Doors open for you, of course, and if you're just a little too swamped there today, we, of course, would understand it. Tomorrow will only be worse, so we'd get it if you had to take a flyer on this one, but if not, doors open and waiting for you. Let's see. Other things that we can fill time with. Let's see. There's been a few. Oh, you know what? This is an interesting one. Here's a comment I picked up on the other day. Our own Susan Gardner tweeting this one out, and with an accompanying article in The Atlantic. And is this her comment, or is this she retweeting someone else's? And I'm reminded tonight of this great question posed in The Atlantic. Okay, because the article is from earlier. She's reminded, Susan was, of this great question posed in The Atlantic. What's the difference between a frat, fraternity, right? Frat, and a gang? That is an interesting question, and it's addressed in an interesting way in this piece from March of this year, March 20th, 2018, in The Atlantic. Ibram X. Kendi is the author here. What's the difference between a frat and a gang? They're both blamed for predisposing their members to violent acts, but they've sparked radically different public policy responses. I bet I don't even have to read you the full text of this article for you to get exactly what he means in all of this. And it's a damn good point. And of course, your initial response is probably, well, the big difference is we arrest members of gangs because they're black or sometimes Latino. And we don't arrest members of frats very often because they're just blowing off steam. And that may be because they're typically white and wealthy and privileged and just being boys. But, of course, when it crosses the line into sexual assault, occasionally, in the most egregious cases, there are investigations and arrests. But pretty rarely, and even when there are egregious cases, we sometimes find that colleges and universities pleading with authorities to let them handle it themselves internally, as though being expelled from school, it's bad and everything, but it's not like going to federal prison. But they sometimes make it out to seem as though that were the case. So a very interesting perspective, a great question, and a very interesting study of the question by an author who I guess, the first paragraph will set it up for you. When I thought about locking up with a crew, gang, not frat, in 1996, I wanted to see a full initiation first, not parts I stumbled upon over the years. My friend Cliff and I arrived at a park not close from my home in Jamaica, Queens. Leaves danced in the wind around our feet, wafting an eerie feeling in my 14-year-old black body. The grounds of the initiation beckoned, a high-rise chain-link fence enclosing 2 basketball courts. Through the daylighted chain, I watched scowls and punches and stomps engulf the uninitiated teen. A stoppage, then an awkward transition to hugs, handshakes, and smiles. The striking contrast shot at my core of authenticity, the insincerity of the punch hug and the stomp smile, murdering my thoughts of joining a crew. The same feeling shot within me 5 years later in 2001 when I thought about joining a college fraternity. The rumors of beatings and sexual assaults overwhelmed me like the worn-down bodies of pledges inching around campus unclothed in hazing. The before contrasted vividly again with the after. The excitable energy of the sparkling new brothers when they came out each year to the deafening cheers of their potential victims, especially in sororities. That's a good point. At these campus spectacles, my mind became a split screen of the past and the present. And again, I don't even know whether we need to file through the whole thing. It's a very interesting perspective and an intensely personal one, and I recommend it to you, and I'll provide you with the link, but I think you get the idea. But there's a great point in there too, right? If you've ever been on campus and involved or in close proximity to others who are going through fraternity initiations, there is that very interesting moment where they sometimes, in finally making it all the way through the initiation, have a sort of coming out celebration as newly minted brothers. And yeah, the deafening cheers of their potential victims, especially in sororities. That's true. That's true. They come and they can't wait to cheer on the new initiates who, in many cases, will only victimize them or their friends later. How interesting. A very weird situation. All right, let's see. I've got a note here from Joan letting me know what's going on. Probably won't have time to call in. That's too bad. But I can imagine things must be going crazy here. And she's telling me what she's writing on. So here's a clue for you, an insider's clue. It hasn't made it to the front page. It hasn't even been published, I guess, yet as a diary. What is Joan working on? Let's change directions of the story. We'll pretend that she's here telling us what she's working on. Doing this right now, probably won't have time to call in, a Politico story. Feinstein, Kavanaugh misled about grand jury secrecy in Vince Foster probe. That is interesting. Let's change directions for that one. What's going on here? Josh Gerstein writing this for Politico. Yeah, it's early this morning published. The top Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Committee is accusing Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh of misleading the Senate about his handling of grand jury secrets while working for independent counsel Kenneth Starr 2 decades ago. Kavanaugh's nomination has run into trouble in the last 2 weeks over allegations of sexual assault by 2 women, but Democrats have also complained that he misled them during his Senate testimony on a number of issues, including his handling of warrantless wiretapping and detainee policy in the George W. Bush administration. I'm a little concerned with those 2 subjects myself, as is Joan, as you well know. Senator Dianne Feinstein told Politico that she has now identified another area in which she believes Kavanaugh was not truthful in communications with senators. She said that by directing officials to speak to reporters during the investigation of President Bill Clinton, Kavanaugh may have violated grand jury secrecy laws, even though he told her and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse that he never broke those rules. And of course, that would be important, not only because, one, it's another instance of him lying about something serious, but also, again, grand jury secrecy rules, that's sort of in your wheelhouse if you want to be a federal judge and, in particular, a Supreme Court justice. And, of course, you'll be asked to rule on questions of whether or not somebody else violated grand jury secrecy laws. I'm sure at some point you could find yourself reviewing a case where somebody has been charged with that crime, and you'll have to decide whether it even is a crime. And apparently, it's the sort of thing that that someone like Kavanaugh might likely feel, well, if a Democrat does it, it is a crime. And if a Republican or someone like me, i.e. a Republican, does it, well, then it isn't. Because after all, it's done all the time. And gee whiz, isn't it interesting that there would be another thing that's a clear crime about which he would have a double standard when it comes to having done it himself, or knowing very well the person who did do it, or at least knowing the school that they went to and what it was really like to be there in those days. And gosh, I had a lot of buds who went there too. According to a memo from the National Archives, Brett Kavanaugh instructed Hickman Ewing, a colleague and deputy counsel in the Starr investigation, to call Chris Ruddy, there's that name again, about matters before a grand jury, which would be illegal to disclose. Feinstein said in a statement to Politico. Chris Ruddy, of course, the guy from Newsmax, who is a permanent fixture during the season anyway, down in Mar-a-Lago, and with whom it is beneficial to be seen having lunch if you are an Access-style reporter, because he's the kind of person that has a relationship with Trump of the sort that he can call Trump over when he sees him at Mar-a-Lago and introduce you as the lunch partner, and then you'll get an exclusive one-on-one with the president. How interesting. So even then, during the days of the Starr investigation, Chris Ruddy is that kind of player, and Brett Kavanaugh knows it and uses him the very same way. I asked Judge Kavanaugh, Feinstein says, in questions for the record, whether he had shared information learned through grand jury proceedings. His answer, which says that he acted consistent with the law, conflicts with the official memo from Mr. Ewing. Disclosing grand jury information is against the law and would be troubling for any lawyer, especially one applying for a promotion to the highest court in the country. And I'll pause here to give you an even scarier possibility. His answer was he acted consistent with the law, right? Well, he didn't act consistent with what the law is now and what the law says now. He only thinks he acted consistent with the law. But I can tell you this, if he is put on the Supreme Court, he will be right. And Senator Feinstein and me and you, or I and you, will all be wrong. Because he'll have been granted the power under our Constitution to declare that, yes, what he did was consistent with the law. Because now the law says that that was okay. Well, it wasn't consistent with the law then. Well, you know what? We say it was. And the law was wrong all those years ago, and there are only a very select few people, 9 at most at the moment, who have the right to say such a thing and have it stand as fact, have it be believed, have it be taken seriously. In fact, have it stand such that there is no appeal from it, no matter how absurd it is. Do you want one of the 9 to be this guy who's already staking out claims to exercise such a power well in advance of his having been confirmed, if that's the case, to the Supreme Court? Do you want somebody who's that much of a psychopath, who understands so very clearly the power that the Supreme Court has and is already poised to abuse it, to excuse his own crimes, and as it turns out, the crimes of the president as well? We have another piece on that. Of course, everyone has been speculating about that one, but I got another piece with another perspective. Let's continue on and see what we can fit in before the break here. I just thought that was a really interesting side note. Democrats have so far gotten little traction with their arguments that Kavanaugh was not up front with senators during his testimony and in other official communications with lawmakers. I know, everybody loves the sex stuff. That gets traction. But the latest instance could bolster their claims that his credibility is in question as he seeks to fight off the allegations of sexual assault. And that is an important supporting role for all of this. You can at least say, well, all right, everyone wants to focus on the sex. That's the salacious stuff. Everybody understands that. But let's understand this. While we're soliciting the he said, she said testimony, keep in mind, he keeps lying to us. That would be useful. The White House did not immediately respond to requests for comment for this story. As with the larger controversies Kavanaugh finds himself enmeshed in, the one Feinstein identified as also sexually explicit. It stems from his questioning of grand jury witness Patrick Knowlton as part of the Starr investigation about a man Knowlton claimed to have seen in Fort Marcy Park not long before the body of Clinton White House lawyer Vince Foster was found there in an apparent suicide in 1993. So, oh dear. Well, is this one sexual in nature? I guess I'll warn everybody once again that this is coming up. Let's see. After being questioned by Kavanaugh in 1995 in front of a Washington grand jury reinvestigating Foster's death, Knowlton complained, this is where I guess the part comes in, Knowlton complained that the young prosecutor asked him inappropriate questions, suggesting Knowlton might have been in the park looking to have sex with another man. Okay. Did the man in the park pass you a note? Knowlton recalled Kavanaugh asking. Later followed by an even more jarring question. Did the man in the park touch your genitals? Well, that is an interesting question to pose to him. I wonder why. Knowlton recounted his version of the questioning to Christopher Ruddy, then a reporter for the conservative Pittsburgh Tribune-Review, investigating and often feeding conspiracy theories that Foster was murdered. Ruddy is now the CEO of Newsmax and a close confidant of President Donald Trump. According to records at the National Archives, a couple weeks after the grand jury appearance, Ruddy reached out to Kavanaugh and left a voicemail message saying he was worried about what he was about to report. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And having pushed the wrong button, we have a little extra music going on in the background. But we'll try and fade that one out as we continue with the article when we left off. And again, if I happen to have wandered into the break, I'll have to repeat myself just a little bit. Make sure you can stay caught up with what was going on in the article. Knowlton, the guy who was being questioned about having possibly seen somebody in the park, was being asked for whatever reason by Brett Kavanaugh about whether or not he was in the park essentially to solicit sex, and whether the man he saw in the park had given him a note, and then even weirder, asked him whether or not the man in the park who Kavanaugh clearly thought might have been Vince Foster wanted to know for some reason, and I don't remember why you would even bring up such an allegation, but I guess in the middle of it all, he probably had his reasons, even if it was to smear Vince Foster, asking him, did the man in the park touch your genitals? So, again, Knowlton recounted his version of this questioning to Christopher Ruddy, who was then working for the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review and investigating and often feeding conspiracy theories that Foster was murdered. Ruddy, now CEO of Newsmax, close confidant of Donald Trump's. According to records at the National Archives, a couple weeks after the grand jury appearance, Ruddy reached out to Kavanaugh, left a voicemail message saying he was worried about what he, Ruddy, was about to report. I didn't ask him that, Kavanaugh insisted in a message to Deputy Independent Counsel Hickman Ewing, per a memo that Ewing wrote. I did ask him about sexual advances by the other man in the park. Fellow prosecutor John Bates and I want you to call Ruddy, at least get him off the genitalia part. I am worried about that. Interesting. Why Kavanaugh believed the wording of the question was so critical is unclear. But Feinstein said the pushback he set in motion violated grand jury secrecy. And in a very Trumpian way, too. Like, okay, I know it's technically unfair, but I want the record of what I did to be unblemished. So I leaked a little bit, and it wasn't all that important anyway, but I just wanted to clean things up to make sure I wasn't misunderstood. I wanted my story being reported, not somebody else's. That seems like the sort of thing Trump would do and approve of. Ewing's memo says he contacted Ruddy and told him, we cannot comment on any questions asked or answers given in the grand jury. It is against the law for us to do so. However, the Star deputy acknowledges he went on to indicate to Ruddy that the genitals question was never asked. I told him that I have been told that Knowlton was not asked the question about genitals, Ewing wrote, saying that he shared the information off the record. Deep background with Ruddy's agreement. Ewing did not respond to a phone message Tuesday night. One prominent legal ethics expert, Stephen Gillers, said he considers the disclosure to Ruddy to be a breach of grand jury secrecy. There is no off-the-record exception to grand jury secrecy, Gillers said. That's interesting. Like that's supposed to be defense. Well, I leaked it, but I leaked it off the record. No, that doesn't work. What strikes me about Ewing's memo, including what he said Kavanaugh said, is how casually, even cavalierly, they were willing to ignore Rule 6E, the very rule concerning secrecy of grand jury proceedings. Of course, this assumes Ewing is quoting Kavanaugh correctly. Gillers, a New York University law professor, says he's baffled why Kavanaugh was so concerned about the precise language used, but that the response he set in motion violated court rules. The information disclosed, that genitalia was not used at the grand jury, is trivial, and if that were done through a slip of the tongue, it would not be a story. But Ewing made the disclosure after getting an off-the-record promise and knowing that what he told Ruddy violated the rule, the professor said. Kavanaugh asked Ewing to get Ruddy off the use of the word, and that required Ewing to violate the rule as he realized. However, a fellow lawyer on the Star probe disputed Tuesday that either Kavanaugh or Ewing did anything wrong. And that's because you can change the law after the fact. But, you can have the opinion that the law doesn't cover that. I don't think it even comes close, said Paul Rosenzweig, now with the think tank R Street Institute. I think he's got a bit of a background as well. There's lots of ways you can talk to press like you. There's lots of ways you can talk to press like you and guide you away from topics without invading grand jury secrecy. Rosenzweig noted that legal complaints over alleged leaks from Starr's operation led to a federal appeals court ruling in 1999 that said grand jury secrecy covers only matters occurring in front of the grand jury or likely to occur there, and not issues like the general direction of the investigation or most activities undertaken by law enforcement agencies. What matters is what actually happens in front of the grand jury, Rosenzweig said. But of course, this was about questioning in front of the grand jury, so I don't know how that helps. If I tell you the grand jury is not investigating something, that by definition is not something happening in front of the grand jury. The former Starr lawyer also noted that while Feinstein's statement says Kavanaugh instructed Ewing to call Ruddy, Ewing was Kavanaugh's boss. If you know Hick Ewing, you know no one was going to order him around, except maybe Judge Starr, and then only some of the time, Rosenzweig quipped. Ewing's memo appears in his files as part of the broader collection of Starr investigation papers at the National Archives. Many of the Foster-related documents have been open for years, and some are posted on the internet on pages clinging to the notion that Foster was murdered. Kavanaugh's reinvestigation ultimately affirmed the notion that the White House lawyer's death was a suicide. Nice of him to come around to that finally. Interesting, and interesting mostly though for the thoughts about whether or not Kavanaugh and his pals are the kind of people you want in the position to be able to define whether or not the things that they did themselves were actually crimes. Because the temptation to define the crime right out of it is going to be overwhelming. Speaking of which, there is more writing, once again from The Atlantic. Natasha Bertrand, I think, on this piece. Yes? Okay. A Supreme Court case could liberate Trump to pardon his associates. Everybody's been talking about that and wondering whether he would do that. And everyone's been relying on it being, a lot of these charges being pardon-proof, as we like to say. That is to say, the charges coming out of the Mueller investigation, because so many of them could, if they were pardoned, would only be pardoned by the president on the federal level and would allow for state prosecution of the same crime, but under a different statute. Well, what if that wasn't the rule anymore? What if you simply said, yeah, that used to be the legal doctrine, but guess what? We're coming up with a new legal doctrine. Or, of course, what if you just said, well, the answer is no, and I can't tell you why, and that's just as binding on you as a Supreme Court decision as a fully explained opinion, by the way. The opinion is luxury on top of the ruling. The ruling is what matters, and the opinions only help you understand what the rulings mean and how to apply them in the future. But you don't have to provide that, by the way, just in case you were wondering. A Supreme Court case could liberate Trump to pardon his associates. Gamble v. United States isn't related to the Russia investigation, But the outcome, this is the subheader here, the outcome, which one senior Republican senator has tried to influence, could still have consequences for the probe. Check this one out. A key Republican senator has quietly weighed in on an upcoming Supreme Court case that could have important consequences for Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. The Utah lawmaker, Orrin Hatch, who sits on the Senate Judiciary Committee, filed a 44-page amicus brief earlier this month in Gamble v. United States, a case that will consider whether the dual sovereignty doctrine should be put to rest. The 150-year-old exception to the Fifth Amendment's double jeopardy clause allows state and federal courts to prosecute the same person for the same criminal offense. According to the brief he filed on September 11th, of all days, Hatch believes the doctrine should be overturned. He, too, is getting in on the act. The extensive federalization of criminal law has rendered ineffective the federalist underpinnings of the dual sovereignty doctrine, his brief reads, and its persistence impairs full realization of the double jeopardy clause's liberty protections. It's an interesting thought, and I know it's sort of counterintuitive to most people's understanding of things like the Fifth Amendment and also the double jeopardy clause of the Fifth Amendment and the idea of pardons. Well, I don't understand. If you're pardoned for a crime, why should you be able to be prosecuted for it on the state level? And it's not all that easy to explain. But, of course, states have their own statutes and the federal government has its own statutes. And if you are immune from prosecution under a federal statute, that doesn't necessarily mean you're immune from prosecution under an existing state statute. That's up to the state, right? It's interesting because that's federalism, which is really amazing that Orrin Hatch, he's making an argument that I think makes a certain amount of sense. It will strike people as counterintuitive and stupid that crimes for which they've been pardoned by the president should be able to be prosecuted by the states. And shouldn't federal law be paramount here? And a pardon should be a pardon, and you shouldn't have to worry about having to get pardoned by both the president and the governor, et cetera, et cetera. Although I don't see why not. Pardon is an extraordinary measure, and you should have to jump through hoops to get one, let alone two. But what an interesting perspective to take in the middle of this particular nomination, that meaning Kavanaugh's, of course, and so many others. I'm curious about this attack on federalism, which is what it is, the idea, of course, that the states ought to be able to, as states, define what their laws are and whether or not they will exercise their prerogative to prosecute people for violations of those laws within their jurisdictions. That's federalism. I'm curious what this fantastic star of the Federalist Society, Brett Kavanaugh, makes of the idea. I'm curious why Orrin Hatch seems to be such a huge enthusiast of so-called Federalist Society members as judges when he clearly disagrees with a major tenet of federalism. And the answer is because none of them are Federalists or Anti-Federalists. They're all gimmitarians, and they just want what they want. When it's convenient to allow to strike down the dual sovereignty doctrine, he'll go ahead and do it. And that is, when there's somebody in the dock that he's in favor of, who he believes is a great person. And remember, he's been such a tremendous character witness for so many people over and over again who turn out to be true scumbags. Orrin Hatch is. When it's people he likes in the docks, there ought to be no such thing as dual sovereignty. And of course, he will complain that some other doctrine will have to step up and take care of things when there are Democrats in the dock who get pardons from the federal executive. Anyway, it's just an interesting question, and I'm wondering when we're going to hear from the so-called Federalist Society about this attack on federalism. The answer is, like I said, you won't, because they're full of gimmitarians in the Federalist Society too. Maybe a good excuse to get back to what the Federalist Society actually does. The name, as with so many things, is just a platitude and a cover. They won't bother us if we say we're the Federalist Society. They'll leave us alone. It sounds legal when it really is just a bunch of conservatives trying to plant radical idiots on the courts and dress them up in the trappings of judgeship so that we can satisfy the cameras covering their confirmation hearings that they look judge-ish enough for us. Anyway, let's continue with this article here. Within the context of the Mueller probe, legal observers have seen the dual sovereignty doctrine as a check on President Donald Trump's power. It could discourage him from trying to shut down the Mueller investigation or pardon anyone caught up in the probe because the pardon wouldn't be applied to state charges. Under settled law, that is to say under settled law, just like Roe v. Wade is settled law, which Kavanaugh says we don't actually have to honor because you don't have to as a Supreme Court justice. But under settled law, if Trump were to pardon his former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, for example, he was convicted last month of, as you know, in federal court on 8 counts of tax and bank fraud. Both New York and Virginia state prosecutors could still charge him for any crimes that violated their respective laws. Both states have a double jeopardy law that bars secondary state prosecutions for committing the same act, but there are important exceptions, as the Fordham University School of Law professor Jed Sugarman has noted. If the dual sovereignty doctrine was tossed, as Hatch wants, then Trump's pardon could theoretically protect Manafort from state action. If Trump were to shut down the investigation or pardon his associates, the escape hatch, then is for cases to be farmed out or picked up by state-level attorneys general who cannot be shut down by Trump and who generally, but with some existing limits, can charge state crimes even after a federal pardon, explained Eli Honig, a former U.S. attorney in New Jersey. If Hatch gets his way, however, a federal pardon would essentially block a subsequent state-level prosecution. A spokesman for the senator denied that his brief was inspired by the Mueller investigation, noting that Hatch has, quote, worked for years to address the problem of overcriminalization of our federal code and wants the court to reconsider the rationale for the doctrines in light of the rapid expansion of both the scope and substance of modern federal criminal law. But while Hatch has earned his, here's the words again, bona fides in the area of criminal justice reform, maybe, the timing of his filing is nevertheless significant. For months, the Gamble case has been analyzed through the lens of the Mueller investigation, and Brett Kavanaugh, Trump's nominee to replace, of course, Justice Anthony Kennedy, could be on the bench by the time the court reconvenes this fall. The justices decided to hear the case one day after Kennedy announced his retirement. On its face, Gamble is entirely unrelated to the Mueller probe. It arose from the prosecution of Terrence Martez Gamble, who was convicted of robbery in Alabama in 2008. His conviction meant that he could not legally own a firearm, but police found a gun in his car after pulling him over for a broken taillight in November 2015. I bet you know how that story goes. Both state and federal prosecutors charged Gamble with the same offense, being a felon in possession of a firearm, based on the same incident, resulting in an extension of his prison sentence. He has repeatedly appealed, arguing that the dual convictions violate the double jeopardy clause. The federal government, meanwhile, has argued that overturning the dual sovereignty doctrine would upend the country's federalist system. It's further claimed that the phenomenon of overcriminalization, which Hatch has railed against, makes states' ability to preserve their own sphere of influence and prevent federal encroachment on law enforcement more important, not less. Paul Rosenzweig, remember that guy? A former senior counsel on the Whitewater investigation who serves as a senior fellow at the conservative R Street Institute, he was just in our last article, said he thinks the Hatch brief is wrong substantively. If over-federalization of crime is a problem, we should stop over-federalization, Rosenzweig said. Hatch's answer is to end federalism. Well, at least we get some inkling of how the Federalist Society feels about this. But he cautioned that the case's implications may not be as significant as they seem. It is at least plausible that if the court gets rid of the doctrine, it would mean that an acquittal in state court would prevent a second trial in federal court and vice versa, Rosenzweig told me. But Trump's pardon power is explicitly limited in the text of the Constitution to pardons for offenses against the United States, Rosenzweig said. If that language is interpreted to mean federal crime offenses specifically, a Trump pardon wouldn't protect against state criminal prosecution, he said, no matter what happens in the double jeopardy clause in Gamble. Amid this legal murkiness, Overall, one thing is clear, Rosenzweig said. A result overturning 200 years of dual sovereignty would very much muddy the waters. It could happen. Very interesting. So I'm glad they had Paul Rosenzweig weigh in on that one. That is interesting. Let's use the end of the show then to double back on the story we began with the other day from the Daily Beast, The Secrets of Leonard Leo, the man behind Trump's Supreme Court pick. Learned a lot about Leo and his background. Where we left off in reading was when we really got to the part about the Federalist Society, which was really the stuff I wanted to get to and the reason I decided to double back and come back to this one. But we learned a bit about that. Let's see if we can find out where we left off. Yes, we'll pick it up here then. Leonard Leo, again, is most closely associated with the Federalist Society, which he joined in the 1990s. Sometimes thought of as a legal association, interesting way of putting it, the Federalist Society is actually a large right-wing network that grooms conservative law students still in law school, sponsoring everything from, you remember this part, free burrito lunches to conferences, speakers, and journals. And you remember how important the journals become in all of this. You can turn someone into an editor of a quote-unquote prestigious legal journal by simply printing your own legal journal, if you have the wherewithal to do that. Do they? Well, you'll see how in just a few minutes. Okay, so recruits and grooms, interesting term, conservative law students while still in law school, links them together, mentors them, finds them jobs, and eventually places them in courts and in government. It's like a large-scale fraternity knitted together by ideological conformity. And then they note the Federalist Society didn't respond to the Daily Beast's request for comment here. But you can see the temptation of joining it. One, burrito lunches. That's good. Ironic, of course, because they're all now against immigration. But you know how that story goes. And, of course, there's the promise of the journals and gives them networks, finds them jobs. Again, back to the subject of Brett Kavanaugh coming out of a very prestigious background. Georgetown Prep, Yale undergrad, Yale Law, and no doubt did a great job there. But the Federalist Society exists, and societies like it existed before it did, to find people jobs, to create the records that make them look like a plausible judicial candidate or somebody who should be working at the upper echelons in order to help shape, help fashion, help determine what the law is. So, where do they get the money for the burrito lunches? That's not hard to imagine. What about for these journals? The idea, well, I'll just start a journal at this law school and place the conservative students in charge of it. If you're one of those people who thinks, well, YouTube is biased against conservatives, then you're probably one of those people who thinks things like the Harvard Law Review is biased against conservatives. So instead, we'll have the Harvard Law Journal. And that will not discriminate against conservatives. Will discriminate against liberals, but will not discriminate against conservatives. Well, that must cost a pretty penny. Well, let's continue with the article here. The Federalist Society Network is now estimated to include over 70,000 people. In 2016, they reported $25 million in net assets. Why? For burritos? Leo played the decisive role in the appointments of Justice Alito, whom few people had ever heard of before Leo first promoted him. Very true. Chief Justice Roberts, who more people had heard of, and Justice Gorsuch, as well as the unprecedented stonewalling of would-be Justice Merrick Garland. Now, of the 25 people on Trump's Supreme Court list, all but one are Federalist Society members or affiliates. I'm not sure what or affiliates is supposed to mean, but it's clearly meant to boost the numbers, but okay. Justice Gorsuch was the speaker at the 2017 Federalist Society Gala. And when Gorsuch was asked how he had come to Trump's attention, he told Congress, he just admitted it, on about December 2nd, 2016, I was contacted by Leonard Leo. That's all you got to do. Get contacted by Leonard Leo. And of the 18 people Trump has nominated to federal appeals courts so far, 17 of the 18 are Federalist Society members or affiliates. These include Appellate Court Judge Amy Coney Barrett, now a leading Supreme Court contender, as it turns out, which means that Trump would just have put her on the appeals court and then just as quickly get ready to move her to the Supreme Court. Talk about leapfrogging. No one's done that since, let's say, Clarence Thomas, nominated to the Supreme Court 16 months after he had been placed on the circuit courts. That being his first judicial nomination, period, by the way. So these include people like Judge Amy Coney Barrett, leading Supreme Court contender, and member of the far-right Catholic sect called People of Praise that makes use of actual handmaids, who they now call women leaders. That's a good upgrade. John Bush, also on the list, who compared abortion to slavery, promoted the birther conspiracy, and then lied to the Senate about doing so, successfully at that. Thomas Farr, whom the Congressional Black Caucus described as the preeminent attorney for North Carolina Republicans seeking to curtail voting rights of people of color. And Jeff Mateer, who said in a speech that parents suing on behalf of their transgender children, quote, really shows you how Satan's plan is working and the destruction that's going on, unquote. Indeed, while the Trump list was initially credited to John Malcolm at the Heritage Foundation, Carter said that this was just another tactic of obfuscation. I've lost track of who Carter is, but a way of saying it's Heritage's list and not the Federalist Society's list. Ironically, while trying to downplay the Federalist Society's influence, White House counsel Don McGahn, the point man on judicial nominees, managed only to confirm it. Our opponents of judicial nominees frequently claim the president has outsourced his selection of judges, McGahn said at a Federalist Society event last year. That is completely false. I've been a member of the Federalist Society since law school, still am. So frankly, it seems like it's been insourced. That's the plan. Of course, put enough people in the ins, and then selecting people from Federalist Society lists means it's insourcing, not outsourcing. I get you. In addition to creating a vast network that serves as a counterpoint to the mainstream legal world, and that's important to remember, that's what it is, a counterpoint to the mainstream legal world, though they pretend they are mainstream. That's what the name Federalist Society is supposed to mean. Well, everyone loves federalism, not Orrin Hatch, but that's mainstream thought. They were wise not to say extreme radical right lunatic legal society. The Federalist Society has mainstreamed ideas, that's how they've done it under the name, mainstreamed ideas that were once considered intellectual outliers. For instance, that most of the New Deal and the administrative state are unconstitutionals, that corporations have free speech and free religion rights, that women and LGBT people are not protected classes under constitutional law, and that there is no right to privacy implied by the Due Process Clause of the Constitution, meaning banning abortion, contraception, and gay marriage are entirely constitutional. 2 decades ago, hardly anyone in the legal academy took these ideas seriously, i.e., you couldn't get yourself a spot on the law review if you wrote an article espousing such views. Therefore, those law reviews discriminated against conservatives and needed to be replaced with law journals sponsored by the Federalist Society that would publish such garbage. Now, though, these are litmus tests for conservative judges. Again, ideas that would have gotten you laughed out of the academy 2 decades ago are now litmus tests for conservative judges. The Senate won't confirm you unless you say you believe these things that were absolute lunacy 20 years ago. And think again about the right that they created of personally going about armed all the time that was never a part of Second Amendment jurisprudence before, but now is. But the Federalist Society, I warn you, is only one arm of Leo's network. Another is the Judicial Crisis Network, founded in 2009 during the Bush 43 administration as the Judicial Confirmation Network. That's the interesting part here. In 2009, when Bush was naming the judges and Democrats were fighting against them, the Judicial Confirmation Network was founded. Then, when President Obama was president and was making his nominations, and they were fighting, it was Republicans fighting against nominations, they changed the name. It's the Judicial Crisis Network. We have to stop the appointment of federal judges now. How interesting. So it was founded in 2009 with the aim of pushing through Bush's conservative judicial nominees, one of which, by the way, was Brett Kavanaugh. And by the way, in case you didn't recognize the name, the Judicial Crisis Network is where Manuel Miranda eventually landed after he was fired for having stolen those memos from the Senate Democrats on the Judiciary Committee and handed them over to Brett Kavanaugh, who denied ever seeing them or at least ever knowing that they were stolen property. That's how tightly knit this whole little circle is. There's much more here. We will return to this article again, I am sure, because the stuff in here is fascinating and compelling, but just wanted to remind you that that was lingering in the background. Now, speaking of things lingering in the background and being brought to the forefront, we hand the microphones over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Next.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Here's a couple of the stories coming up. We'll get to some of the smaller and lesser-known stuff. ICE detained a father in Wisconsin who was preparing for his children's baptisms while being brown. North Dakota's voter ID law is revived in a major setback to Native American voters. That and much more, plus Kavanaugh news next.